Hi there, and thanks for joining me for another episode of Mr. Ed Makes. And in this episode, I'm going to be doing the Miura-Ori origami fold again. This is one of my, if not my most popular video on my channel. And I get new subscribers because of this video, and I also get some complaints from people who have watched the video and said that they wish that it was slower and that I would describe it in more detail, and that's what I'm going to do in this video. This is a really long video. That's one of the reasons why the other video was sped up, is because most people that I found in my analytics aren't interested in watching a long video about art. But that leaves out the handful or so people who don't mind watching the long video. So I decided I would take the time, spend half a day trying to make this video for you guys so you can get a better idea of what's going on here. So I figured the best way that I could describe it is to just walk you through my process of discovering this fold on my own. I discovered this in the early 90s, and I say discovered, I watched a PBS show called Nova. You may be familiar with it. And on that show they were talking about origami, and they showed this briefly, ever so briefly. It was maybe 10 to 30 seconds of footage. They showed this specific fold that I'm doing here. And at the time there was no internet, and the library where I was from just really wasn't that much of a help. So I set out to try to figure it out on my own. And I could tell from just from my memory that in order to get it to do what I wanted it to do in the end, I had to have as many degrees of freedom of movement as I could possibly get out of the paper. So the way that you do that is to create folds on all of the axes. So you're folding it horizontally once, you're folding it vertically once, and you're folding it diagonally twice, actually. And I'd kind of describe that here later on, but you can see this is one piece of that. And you take these and you could, like I did there, tape them together to make a whole sheet of them, or you can take the whole sheet and try to fold as many of those into it as you possibly can. And there are different ways of doing it. One way doesn't pre-fold it, so you're putting the folds in as the end shape is being created. Here I'm putting the folds in advance because that's how I taught myself to make it, was to give yourself as many degrees of freedom as you can and then impress that pattern, that mountain valley pattern, into all of these degrees of freedom. So in the end you have lines in the end shape that aren't being used, and that's a result of how I've learned how to do the process. So you might want to learn to do it a different way because it takes less time. This process, it has extra steps, and those extra steps are repeated again and again. So it does take a lot of extra time this way. But I like the end result. Those extra lines do things from an artistic or an aesthetic standpoint. When you start to color it or stain it or paint it, they can also be kind of a detriment to that process. It's just a matter of what your personal aesthetic is, what you're trying to achieve with this, whether or not you want to do it this way or the other way. Whichever way you decide to do it, it's going to be challenging. And you'll see in this video that I was a little rusty and the paper I was using wasn't the best. And I was having a hard time myself trying to get it to fold itself in the end. So it's not just, if you're having trouble with this, it's not just you. People who have a lot of experience with these may have problems trying to see the end shape. And when I say the end shape, it's those many different repeating patterns all pressed into the paper. So when I talk about degrees of freedom, what I'm talking about are the folds and the way that that paper will fold. So part of the process here is making these uniform folds that go back and forth like a hinge, and I spoke about this before. So you can see here I'm folding it one way, and then I'm going and folding it the other way. And I'm using, you can use your finger. In the end I think I just used my fingers because it was faster than picking up a folding stone that I have there. Taking your time too is important. I rush it here, and I think in the video I show you what happens when you rush things, and when you're not careful about how you fold the paper. So you'll see me do it, and not just me, but other people who have been working with paper folding origami for a while. You'll see that they have a particular technique about how they will crease the paper, and it's so that you avoid getting this arc. It will actually stretch on one side opposed to the other, and it creates a curve, and you don't want that curve in there. You want the line, the fold, to be straight across. So to keep it from folding, you kind of want to press it in at different points, and then kind of go to those points and lightly press it, and then you can more firmly press it into position to get the kind of accuracy you're looking for. So if you take this shape, if you take the tessellation down really, really far, attention to detail and accuracy is really going to be important, because that's where the errors start to show up. One of the important things to remember when you're trying to give yourself those degrees of freedom, the diagonals are a totally different kind of thing. So you have to treat those differently when you're counting or trying to keep things equal in the number of folds. So if you have 4 folds horizontally, you're going to want to have 4 folds vertically. So you're basically doing your folds and then turning the paper and then doing the same number of folds there. And then when you get to the diagonals, things change. And this really becomes apparent once you're trying to put in the tessellations, because you see where you need to use some of those diagonals, they kind of cut the parallelograms in half. But the parallelograms are a little bit longer than the diagonals, so you can see you need about twice as many diagonal folds as you have horizontal and vertical folds. So basically, if you have 4 horizontal and vertical folds, you're going to want to have 8 diagonal folds. So when I say doing the diagonals is kind of a different thing, when you're doing the horizontal and vertical, you have stuff all along the edges that can kind of help you keep things straight. But when you're doing the diagonals, you don't really have the edges to help you keep things straight. You have the diagonal folds to help you keep things straight. Well, if you're just starting the diagonal folds, you don't really have any diagonal folds to benchmark things against to get things really square in essence. So the diagonals can be really challenging. And one of the ways that I've found that you can cut down on the amount of folding errors is to start at one corner, work to the center, and then turn that paper around, and then start at the other corner and then go to the center. And what that does is it kind of pushes the folding errors toward the center line. And that's half the distance, so it's really half of the number of folding errors are going to end up in the center. And when you turn it around, you have another half of folding errors that end up in the center. So then the center line kind of divides the folding error in half, and you get the average of those errors right along that center line. And that may not make any sense now, but if you do a couple of these, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you go all the way across the paper, those folding errors are going to get compounded until you get to the very end triangle, and you're going to notice that it's way off. So it's best to have it be half the way off at the center one way, and then half the way off at the center the other way, and then it kind of gets averaged by that middle fold that's already there. So I would, you do your fold the paper fully one time so that you have that center line, and then that's what you're kind of fold toward. And hopefully over the average, everything will be, all your folding errors will be kind of spread out, and it's not going to look as bad on one end or in one spot. So once you have that, you can see you start to get a lot of degrees of freedom, and you can fold the paper in ways that it will move freely in maybe one respect, but then it doesn't want to move freely in another respect. So you can start to get the feel of how the paper folding in opposite directions at opposite angles, 90s and 45 degrees, really generates a lot of interesting properties in terms of the way that dimensions change as things are compressed or expanded. There's actually a word for that, and I looked it up. I couldn't remember what it is, but it's there's a formula that describes a shape that, when compressed, changes another dimension. Like, say it's two-dimensional, you compress it along one, compress it one way, and then it grows like in the z dimension. So it gets height as you compress it. There's a name for things that have properties like that, and that's what the Miura-Ori fold is. It's one of these objects where you compress it and it changes its dimension in along another axis or along two axes. So in this one, the properties of it are really awesome, and if you've played around with one at all, you know what I'm talking about. And if that's what you're looking to do, then hopefully this video will be a way for you to achieve that. I'm trying to break this down as much as I can so you can get as much insight into what's happening, so that when you perform this yourself and you don't know exactly where you're at, or you haven't understood it completely one way, you've got the other ways to kind of help you find your way to what you're trying to do. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I'm taking a lot of care to work the paper back and forth and give it a lot of play. So as you'll see as I'm folding this, I kind of go over it again and again just to make sure that I got every fold, that I haven't skipped one, that it moves freely one way and the other, that it's not got any kind of bias. And once you get all those directions folded, then you go and fold it horizontally or vertically. Just pick a direction and then you can start to see it take shape. You push in those end tabs, and now you have two rows of that original one. So I made one unit and I taped those one units together to make two units, and now I have two units that I've taped together to make four units. So you can kind of see how the tessellation breaks down as you fold more and more and more. So this is the I guess you would say first level. The one on the bottom is the first level tessellation, and those are the first level, but they're just one unit of that. You put those together and that's what you get. You tessellate those and that's the sheet that emerges. As a tip for beginners, I would say try to make the one unit that you see there on the right. Try to make one of those. And if you can make one of those, then just keep it on the side and use it as a reference, so that when you start trying to make many levels of the tessellation, or many multiple times of it, you can have a reference. You can see, what kind of fold do I have to put in there? How does that mountain need to go up? Does that valley need to go down? You can get an idea for that if you have some reference on the side. So I would encourage you to try and do that. Start small. Get that one down visually. I think that's actually how I did it. I made one unit, and then I tried to imagine how I could put that one unit in a whole sheet. And when I first started out, I was like, I can't do this I need more folds. So I had done the horizontal, vertical, and diagonal folds, all equal numbers. And when I tried to fold it, I couldn't get it to go. I'm like, I'm missing something here. It looks like I'm missing a fold. So I played around with it again. I added more horizontal and vertical folds, and I ran into the same problem. I'm like, I'm still missing a fold. Well, what I was doing was I was trying to use the horizontal vertical number folds in parallel with the diagonals, and I can't do that the way that I do it. I have one too many diagonals. So I had to go backwards. So even though I had folded more horizontal and verticals than I needed, so it looked funky. The short of it was, it looked funky at the end, and it was super hard to fold because I had all these extra lines in there. So it was hard to see where the folds went. So I went back to the drawing board and started over, and that's what you see here. The end result of failure. You finally get it right. So what I'm doing now is adding another level to the tessellation. So I'm basically multiplying it. So if I had 4 before, now I'm going to have, I guess I'm squaring it. So I'll have 16 afterward. So that's how it goes, and it's like exponential growth. So you try to take this down to 32 or 64 or whatever multiple it is. I can't think of it right off of the top of my head. But once you get down that far, you run into the problem where you just can't, it's physically impossible to fold the paper because there's too many folds too close together. It'd be like folding cardboard. It just gets really tough. So there's kind of limits to what you can do with the paper, but I can imagine that it could be 3D printed with a pretty high density of tessellations. So in the process of this, I'm kind of rushing things. I would definitely take a lot more care if I was going to use this for anything more than demonstrations. First of all, I wouldn't have used this. I think this is just high-vis printer paper. I would use some origami paper or something. I've used watercolor paper before because I like to paint these or color them afterwards and create an organic texture that's juxtaposed, I love that word, against the very linear structural texture of the tessellations. When you put those two things together, it's really interesting. And I've sold several of those. I haven't lately done this kind of artwork for sale. I've been focusing on some other things, but I might revisit this because I do have a lot of new ideas for how I can embellish the shape in a wall art or a lamp or something like that. So it's not just fun to play with, you can use it as a structure. So I think here I'm describing how you need these extra diagonals. So where I folded this now, I don't have enough diagonal lines. You can see I'm missing one there. And that was the problem I was running into when I was first making this. I was like, I'm missing something. I just couldn't compute it. It took me a long time to really figure it out and be like, oh yeah, that's what it is. You get that light bulb moment. It seems really obvious now, but at the time I just couldn't envision that I was missing a fold, and it's because I don't use all of those folds. I was trying to look at it as an efficiency problem. I didn't want to have more folds than I needed. And you can do this without having to put those extra folds in. In fact, there's probably a good video on the sidebar or below if you're on mobile that will describe that. I've went through a few extra videos and have noticed that some of the most popular ones do fold it a different way. So I would encourage you to just try both ways and see which ones work best for you. So here I'm trying to put those that extra diagonal fold in there, and I'm making sure that my horizontal and my vertical folds are impressed really well. I wish I knew what kind of stone that was that I'm using as a folding stone. It was a gift somebody gave to me. It works really nicely. Now, even though I am going a little bit faster with this than I normally would like, and also I can't really see where I'm doing the folds because the camera is directly above the work. Normally I'm hovering directly above it quite intently. It's strange to watch probably. But just to get those folds to line up right, because optically as you're looking at them, it may look like they're perfectly aligned, and then once you compress it, it will move off of alignment. So you really have to stay ahead of it when you're folding it, and the best way that you can do that is to be able to see what you're doing. Origami paper a lot of times will have two different colored sides, so you can tell. It helps you visually make sure that your folds are on point. And since this isn't that, it's a little bit more challenging. Plus, I'm trying to do it for the video. But even so, I am trying to take care, and I'm following that technique where you fold to the center. And that really helps a lot. And I noticed that as I was going, that errors were starting to happen. So I was able to compensate and see those happening, and able to compensate a little bit and get it to stretch the other way if I needed to. So overall, you get something that's pretty fairly uniform. And I don't know if I'm particularly anal retentive about it, but I am pretty persnickety about how accurate the folds are. When I first started doing this, accuracy may not have been the top priority, and the end results showed it wasn't the top priority. So you really want to start be as accurate as you can. You know, you put a lot of work into this, and if you mess up one part, it can kind of throw everything else off, and you don't want that work to go down the drain. So really taking the care to fold these carefully, and to know what you're doing with folding. You know, it seems just oh, you're just folding paper and pressing it down and creasing it. It's like, no, that's not exactly what you're doing. And if you do it at all, you'll find out that it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So I would encourage you to just practice, get familiar with the medium. If you're not really well practiced at fine origami, start with your basics and learn from it and see, I didn't do this and this was what happened. I did this and this is what happened. And it's through that process of learning that you're really going to get a feel for all the nuances that no one can really tell you or describe in a video or really even think to. You can see it takes a while to do this fold. This is just one level, and I'm doing it for the video here in real time so you can see how much time it takes to fold just this large size. I like to go finer, a finer size than this, so you can add another 30 minutes to that, because once you take it down as far as I'm going to do in this video, if you take it down again, you're basically starting all over. You've got to put the same number of folds in again over the ones that are already there, and then square the number of tessellations that you have to fold into it at the end. So it can get really labor intensive. I think that's why I don't see as much of this art on the market as I feel like should be out there. I find this to be really interesting, and I feel like a lot of artists and people who appreciate art enjoy seeing this, and I've showed it to a lot of people and they've enjoyed playing around with it. So I know that it's something that people would enjoy having if it was available. I think it's just so hard to do. It takes up so much time, and then at the end when you tell someone they have to pay you $80 for it, they're kind of unwilling to let go of that kind of money for just a folded piece of paper. So now I'm just putting those diagonals in again, and I'm doing it a few different ways. It just depends on the situation, how or which way I decide to fold it. And by a couple different ways, I can take one folded edge and fold it to another folded edge, and then press those opposing folded edges down, and then that creates the inner fold that you're making. You can do it that way. Or you can just bend the piece of paper over, and then you have the fold toward you and just flatten it at you that way. So it's not just, it's called origami for a reason. I mean, if it was just folding paper, I think people would just call it folding paper. But it's a lot more nuanced than that, and there's a lot of science that goes into it, obviously, not just in the end result shape that you get from folding or manipulating a flat sheet of paper, but also the substrate itself and how it behaves and how it can actually work against your goals, because it has characteristics that you have to take into account because you're working it. When you work that material, those characteristics come out, and they can either work for you or against you. And what I mean by that is the paper will stretch. Sometimes it'll stretch in ways that you just don't anticipate. Depending on the paper that you're using, this is not the kind of paper that you need to use. There's some paper that it's meant to stretch. You want it to stretch. Some paper you want it to be really rigid, and it just depends on what your goals are. So the point of that is there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot to it. Obviously, it's a whole foundation of art, and this is just one little bitty part of it. I'm not an origamist. I'm a materials artist, and this is just one of the materials that I work with, and origami is just one of the techniques that I use to work with paper. So if it looks like, or if I want to sound like an expert or not, I'm not a folding expert. Even though I did figure this out on my own after seeing the 30-second or whatever 10-second clip on television at a time where that's all you got. You didn't get to go to the internet and look it up the next day. You didn't get to go to YouTube and watch a video about it. If you wanted to know about it, you had to just give it a try and figure it out yourself. And kind of had a lot of parallel learning back in the day. And when I figured this out, it did almost make me sick to my stomach trying to get these folds. Even now, I'm a little rusty with this, and I was having such a hard time trying to get this even to see the pattern. Even though I have it right there in front of me, seeing the pattern all meshed together, lining up together, was really challenging. But once you finish a row, you can flatten it down, and that kind of creases it in place, and then that's going to kind of help you make your way down, but it's not a perfect scheme here. I'm still having problems. I figured out one of the problems was I just simply couldn't see it because I'm filming. I don't have it positioned well. I can't get the light to hit it in the way that I can see the facets. Looking at it now, I can clearly see what I have to do, but I remember in the time I could not see that. So I was having a really hard time there. The challenge I was having was not all of the creases were evenly folded, like the strength of them. What I mean is, some folds wanted to move real easy, some folds didn't want to move hardly at all. And you need all those folds to be as unbiased as possible so that you don't have anything working against you. And I had a couple diagonals working against me, and I had a couple horizontal folds that were working against what I was trying to accomplish. Like when I would try to make a valley, something else would pop out of shape, or one thing just did not want to go into position as easily as everything else. And so making your folds even and unbiased in terms of the how easily they want to move, like they fold back and forth real easily, or are they a little stiff going one way versus the other. If it's a little more stiff going one way, then fold that again. And that's kind of, you'll see me when I do the horizontal, vertical, and diagonal folds. That's what I'm doing. I'm going back and forth and making sure that they're evenly, that it wants to move like a door. This was originally a super challenging project to create for the first time. And every time I make it, it's a new experience. Sometimes it goes together really easily. Everything's on point. I don't have any problems at all. Other times, I don't know if it's fatigue, what it is, I just cannot get it to work right. So I found that the best thing you can do is just set it aside, go make you some tea, take a few minutes, come back, fresh eyes, we'll see new things. And then sometimes you can get back to it. The other thing too is, don't be worried that if you get to this point and you're like, oh, I've ruined it. It's all crumpled in one spot and there's extra folds in it now. Don't sweat it. As long as it's not horribly mutilated, just keep working it. You'll eventually get it close to, because you have the other folds helping you as well. So even though one part might be off a little bit, you're going to use all the other folds to kind of push everything together, all nice and neat. So work it to the end and then get it all flat, and then you can kind of fudge and push things back to where they need to be. Flatten it, crease it really hard and stiff. Maybe put a book on it for a day. Come back to it, and I promise it's going to be in that pattern forever. I've taken these, I've gotten them wet, I've painted them, I folded them back, they're fine. So they can take a lot of abuse. Don't be discouraged because in the process of trying to get the tessellations in, you crumple it in parts. You can get it back. I have faith in you. It's going to be even more challenging, but you can do it. Don't give up. So you can see I've actually had that happen here. I had a part crumple that I didn't want to, and now I'm having a little bit of a challenge getting it to work, but it's not impossible. You just have to be really gingerly and kind of coax it into position. I think I'm also having a hard time trying to imagine. You can see the far end, it goes down, and closer where my thumb is, where I'm supposed to be working that one needs to go up. I'm not imagining that while I'm actually folding it, but it's obvious to me now. So once you get familiar with it, you can kind of see those things like, oh, this needs to go here. Once I get to the ends, I know it's going to be of a particular shape, a particular pattern. So that kind of helps you as you get a little bit more experience. So I'm almost to the end of this video. I have a few more minutes left, maybe a minute or so left. And I just wanted to let you guys know, thank you for all the new subscribers. Thank you for leaving the comments, and even thank you for asking for this video. I don't normally do video requests. I mean, I don't get a lot to begin with, and when I do, I just don't work like that. But I have had so many on this video, and it is my most popular, that I wanted to give those people a chance who didn't get it from the original video another opportunity, give them some more time, because that's what I was doing with the first video, just trying to save time for viewer fatigue. I didn't want you to have to sit through a 30-minute video, but if you want to, here you go. This is real life, real time, me trying to struggle through folding the tessellations in this way. This way really is harder. But like I said, the end results are different. So it just depends on what you're in for, what you're capable of, and what you're looking for at the end. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give me a thumbs up, which is a like. I think in a previous video I said give me a thumbs up and a like. Hey, might as well. And leave a comment if you have any questions or if you just want to say hi. Also, if you're not subscribed, I would be so honored if you would subscribe to my channel and follow me by clicking the bell to be notified when I upload. I usually try to upload a video once a week. Sometimes I miss a week, but I'm usually fairly regular. So you get a lot of content, a lot of bang for your buck, if you will. I have been doing a lot of videos on generative art and computer coding, but I do have over 200 videos that are anything but that. So if I don't post, be sure to go through some of my videos that I've posted in the past. There's lots of cool stuff there. And I guess that's it. Thanks for watching. And as always, until next time, you guys, take care.